That morning, Charlotte Vane stepped out of her white Porsche, looked at the rust-covered Ford pickup parked beside her, and laughed. Not politely a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that escapes a person who has never had to consider that old things can carry more than they look. The truck was old enough to belong in an agriculture museum. The man standing next to it wore a faded gray shirt, hands rough with work, and he did not look back at her. His name was Logan Hurst. 3 hours later, Charlotte stood on the roof of that same Porsche in the middle of a flooded road, water rising past her chest, and that museum truck was the only thing moving toward her. Don't look away. What Logan kept hidden beneath all that rust and dust weighed more than any truck ever could. Logan Hurst had been waking up at 5:30 every morning for 4 years, not because he set an alarm, but because his body had recalibrated itself to the shape of his life. He would put the coffee on, listen to it brew, check the weather on his phone, and then stand at the kitchen window for exactly as long as it took to finish the first cup. His house was a 3-bedroom rancher on the edge of Millbrook, Tennessee, the kind of house that would not photograph well but felt solid the moment you stepped inside, where the floors were even and the doors all closed flush. He had painted it himself the second summer after he moved back, choosing a dark green that his daughter Nora had picked out of a catalog, pointing at it with a seriousness that made him understand she was not being arbitrary. The truck was parked in the gravel driveway every night, backed in, the way a man parks when he might need to leave fast. It was a 1994 Ford F-250, the color of dried mud under the wheel wells and the color of old rust along the tailgate seam, with a crack in the passenger side mirror that Logan had wrapped in electrical tape 2 winters ago. It ran. That was what he said when people mentioned it. It runs. He picked Nora up from Millbrook Elementary every afternoon at 2:50, unless a job ran long, in which case he called ahead and Mrs. Patterson held her in the office with a puzzle. That Tuesday, Nora came running out through the double doors with a spelling test in her hand, an A circled at the top in red pen, and she stuffed it into his shirt pocket without breaking stride, swinging up into the cab in one motion. She buckled herself in, pulled Biscuit, a worn stuffed bear with one button eye, out of her backpack, and said that Biscuit wanted tacos. Logan asked if Biscuit had any money. Nora said Biscuit was saving up. He drove 2 blocks out of the way and got her tacos from the truck at the corner of Elm and 2nd, and they ate in the cab with the windows down, while the afternoon light came in gold and flat across the dashboard. On the way home, he stopped at Edna Marsh's house because her porch light had been out for a week, and she'd called twice, not complaining, just mentioning. He changed the fixture in 11 minutes. She pressed a box of lemon cookies into his hands and told him he was a good man. He told her she said that to everyone. She told him she only said it when it was true. There was a drawer in the center console of the F-250 that he never opened while Nora was in the car. It held a few folded receipts, a spare fuse, and a laminated badge that had been snapped in 2 pieces and never thrown away. The logo on it read, Meridian Power Systems, in the clean sans serif type of a corporation that had once believed its own press releases. Logan had worked there for 9 years. He had designed load distribution frameworks for regional power grids covering 7 southeastern states, not managed them, not supervised the team that maintained them, but designed the underlying architecture that made them function at scale. He had been the kind of engineer other engineers called when the math was not adding up and the deadline was not moving. He did not talk about that in Millbrook. He had not talked about it anywhere in a long time. That evening, he drove out to Franklin's Market on Pratt Street to fix a breaker panel the old man had been nursing since spring. Franklin told him there was talk of a developer from Nashville coming in to look at the district. Said he'd heard they wanted to buy out the whole block. Logan tightened the last connector, replaced the cover plate, and said he hoped Franklin got a fair price. Franklin said he wasn't interested in any price. The rain started on the drive home, light and directionless, the kind that doesn't commit. The radio weather segment said a tropical depression was organizing over the Gulf and would make landfall somewhere along the Alabama coast by the weekend. Logan looked at the sky through the windshield. Nora was asleep in the back seat with Biscuit pressed against her cheek. He turned the heat on low and drove the rest of the way in quiet. Charlotte Vane had not planned to stay in Millbrook longer than 48 hours. She had a full week scheduled in Nashville, 3 board calls, a financing review, a dinner with a capital partner she had been courting for the better part of a year. But the Millbrook Commercial Revitalization Project, as she and Isaac had taken to calling it in their internal documents, was the most promising land acquisition opportunity her company, Vane and Associates, had identified in 4 years. The concept was straightforward. A tired commercial corridor in a small Tennessee market, undervalued by the metrics that most developers watched, but sitting directly on the path of a state infrastructure corridor that would, within 5 years, triple the commuter traffic through the county. She had been right about 3 deals like this before. She trusted the pattern. Isaac Fleming, her operations director, drove them in from Nashville on Wednesday morning, while Charlotte finished a call in the back seat, her laptop open beside her, and a half-eaten protein bar forgotten on the armrest. She was 34 years old, and she ran a company with 41 employees and a 9-figure portfolio, and she wore both of those facts with the particular ease of someone who has never seriously questioned whether she deserved them. The parking lot at Millbrook Fresh was where she first saw the truck, and the man beside it, and where she made the sound she would later spend more time thinking about than she expected. Her laugh was not a verdict. It was not deliberate. It was simply the reflex of a person who has organized the world into categories, and who had, without examination, placed rust and age and visible wear into the category of failure. Isaac said something low beside her, something about the truck looking like it belonged in an agriculture museum, and she did not correct him, which she would also think about later. The man loading groceries heard all of it. He closed the tailgate, got in, and drove away without a word. In the back seat, a small girl with dark braids looked out the rear window for a moment, then looked away. Charlotte watched the truck until it turned onto the main road, then walked toward the entrance of the market with her phone already back in her hand. She met with Franklin that afternoon in the back of his shop, at a table stacked with invoices and a coffee maker that looked older than the building. She laid out her preliminary offer, walked him through the projected economic impact, talked about the jobs the development would create, the tax base it would strengthen. Franklin listened with the patience of a man who has heard good arguments for things he doesn't intend to do. He told her the building had been in his family since his grandfather opened it in 1952, and that some things were not available regardless of what the math said. Charlotte left her offer in writing and told him to take his time. On the drive back to the inn, she spotted the F-250 parked in front of a house on the residential side of Pratt Street, and the same man on a ladder at a utility pole, working in the light rain with the focused calm of someone who had done this enough times that the height and the weather were simply conditions, not problems. Isaac glanced up and said something about local tradespeople. Charlotte did not respond. The rain was picking up. She told Isaac the weather would clear by morning. It was the first miscalculation of the trip, and not the one that would cost her the most. The storm did not clear by morning. It did not approach on schedule, or track the path the early models had projected, or announce its severity in a way that gave people time to make different choices. The tropical depression in the Gulf had strengthened overnight into a named storm, and by the time the updated track came through, the outer bands were already over Middle Tennessee, dropping 3 inches an hour on a watershed that had not been dry since August. Millbrook flooded in sections the low ground first, then the underpasses, then the county roads that fed into the highway. By 7 in the morning, the Emergency Management Office had issued a road closure for the stretch of County Road 12 that dipped through the Hatchet Creek bottomland before connecting to State Route 43. There were 2 signs posted. One was on a sawhorse at the north end of the dip. The other was in a text alert that had gone to every registered phone in the county at 6:42, which was 40 minutes before Charlotte had woken up. She had a flight out of Nashville at 11. If she left by 8, she would have time. Isaac mentioned the closure as she was pulling on her jacket. She looked at the map on her phone and weighed the detour 22 additional minutes around the long way against the road, which her phone showed as a 300-foot stretch of low ground that the Cayenne's clearance could manage. Isaac said her name once, in the flat tone he used when he knew she had already decided. Charlotte told him to wait at the inn. She would call when she was through. The first 20 feet of water were manageable. The second 20 were less so. She felt the moment the engine note changed, a subtle roughening, a hesitation, and understood immediately what it meant, because she was not unintelligent, only in this moment, poorly informed about the speed at which water moves when a creek has jumped its banks and is using a county road as a channel. The Porsche died at what she estimated was the center of the crossing. She tried the ignition twice. The water had found the air intake. The vehicle did not respond. She got out. That was the decision that could have killed her, not staying in the water too long, but getting out at all. Because the moment her feet left the running board, she understood that what she had been looking at through the windshield was not still water, but moving water, and it was moving faster and deeper than the surface suggested. She had time to grab the door handle and haul herself up onto the roof before the current reached her calves. She stood there on the white metal in the rain, the water gray-brown and churning below her, pieces of debris sliding past a section of wooden fence, a tire, something orange and shapeless she couldn't identify. Her phone had one bar. She called 911. The operator was calm and brief. Multiple incidents in the county. Crews deployed, estimated response time 40 to 60 minutes. The water, in Charlotte Vane's estimation, was not going to wait 40 to 60 minutes. It had already risen 4 inches since she stopped the car. She could feel the Porsche shifting slightly beneath her, the weight redistributing as the current pressed against the driver's side panel. She looked in every direction, and there was nothing, no other cars, no buildings on this stretch, just the water and the tree line on both sides, and the rain coming down in sheets that made everything past 30 feet indistinct and gray. She had been in difficult rooms before. She had been in negotiations that went sideways, deals that collapsed at midnight, a board meeting 3 years ago where 2 members had tried to remove her, and she had talked for 90 minutes straight until the room changed its mind. She knew how to work a situation. There was no situation to work here. There was only water and patience and the particular helplessness of a person who has spent years building systems to manage risk, discovering that not all risks are manageable. And then, from the north end of the road, through the curtain of rain, came the sound. Low and mechanical and unmistakable. Not the clean hum of a modern engine, but the deeper, unhurried voice of something built before engineers worried about how things sounded. 2 headlights appeared high-mounted, amber, the kind of lights positioned to see over tall grass and uneven terrain. The truck came down to the water line and stopped. Logan had not been driving toward Charlotte Vane. He had been driving toward the Maplewood residential block, 3/4 of a mile past the crossing, where 6 houses on a spur line fed off a transformer that was likely overwhelmed by the storm load and possibly damaged. He had gotten a call at 6:30 from a woman named Mrs. Tully, who said her power had gone out and her husband's oxygen concentrator was running on battery backup. Logan had dropped Nora at Edna Marsh's house with her backpack and biscuit and a written note of his cell number, and he had loaded his gear and driven into the storm. He reached the County Road 12 closure, ignored the sawhorse, not out of recklessness, but because the F-250 sat high enough and was heavy enough, and he knew this road in 3 seasons of flood, and that was when his headlights found the white Porsche, sideways in the current, and the figure standing on its roof. He pulled to the edge of the dry road. He did not need more than 2 seconds to assess the situation. He recognized the car. He got out. The water was at his waist by the time he reached mid-crossing, cold enough to pull the breath short. The current steady but not overwhelming for a man with his weight and footing. He had the tow strap over his shoulder, a 2-inch nylon strap, old enough that the webbing had softened, rated for 12,000 pounds. He worked the hook through the tow point under the Porsche's rear bumper without speaking, without asking Charlotte for anything, without looking up at her more than once to confirm she was upright and uninjured. The water tried to move him twice. He planted and waited it out both times. Charlotte Vane, crouching on the roof of her disabled car in the rain, watching this man work in the water below her, had the unmooring experience of having nothing useful to contribute to her own rescue. She recognized him. The gray shirt was different, but the stillness was the same quality of self-possession she had dismissed in a parking lot 24 hours ago, as the posture of a man with nowhere better to be. Logan waded back to the truck, got in, checked his mirrors, and eased the F-250 forward. The tow strap went taut. The rear tires bit. The truck's engine deepened and steadied, the whole frame shuddering once as the weight transferred, and then the Porsche began to move slowly, then with more confidence, dragging through the current and up the gentle grade toward the dry road edge. Charlotte rode the roof until the Porsche's rear wheels found solid ground, then climbed down, her legs uncertain under her. Logan had already gotten out to unhook the strap. He worked the clip loose, wiped it against his jeans out of habit, and began coiling the strap back into its loop. He looked at her once, a direct, even look, no more theatrical than a contractor confirming a job was done. He said quietly, without preamble, "You hurt anywhere?" She shook her head. He nodded, the way a person nods when they have confirmed a fact, and filed it. He turned back to the truck. Charlotte said something, started to say something, tried to locate in the standard vocabulary of gratitude a sentence equal to what had just happened, and found nothing adequate. Logan pulled open the driver's door and said, without turning around, that she should get to higher ground and that the water was still rising on this stretch. Then he got back in, and the F-250 rolled forward and down into the crossing, without any hesitation at all, heading toward Mrs. Tully's house and the man with the oxygen concentrator, because that was where he had been going before he stopped, and stopping had not changed his direction. Charlotte stood on the road shoulder in the rain and watched the truck's taillights until they disappeared into the gray. She was shaking from the cold, she told herself, from the cold and the adrenaline. Isaac found her 20 minutes later after she called him from the high end of the road. He asked if she was all right. She said yes. He asked about the car. She looked back at the Porsche, which had died with its nose pointed toward the water and its rear end resting at an angle on the gravel shoulder, and said she wasn't sure yet. She did not say anything else for a long time. Isaac, who had worked for Charlotte Vane for 4 years and had learned to read her silences the way a navigator reads weather, understood that something had shifted and said nothing further. The roads out of Millbrook stayed closed through Thursday. Charlotte took a room at the Millbrook Inn, 12 units, hand-painted sign, a breakfast served at 7 by the owner's wife, who remembered everyone's order and did not write it down. That first evening, Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed in her room and looked at her hands, which were steady again, and thought about the crossing. Not about the water or the car or the logistics of the rescue, about the man, about the specific quality of attention he had brought to an emergency that was not his emergency, not reluctant, not performed, but simply present in the way of someone who has already answered the question of what kind of person he is and does not need to revisit it under pressure. She had been in corporate environments for 11 years. She had hired several hundred people. She recognized competence when she saw it. What she had seen in that crossing was something more precise than competence. It was mastery applied without audience. She asked Isaac to run a background search on a local electrician named Logan Hurst. Isaac came back in an hour with a thin file. Hurst Electric, sole proprietorship, registered in Crane County, Tennessee, 4 years prior. Address on Birchwood Lane. One employee himself. Licensed electrician, general and low voltage. Before that, the file went nearly silent. No social media, no news mentions, no professional directory listings. The 4 years before Millbrook were a blank in every database Isaac knew how to search. He's basically a ghost, Isaac said. Charlotte stared at the paper for a moment, then at the space where the earlier history should have been. She had built a career on finding what was under the surface of things: undervalued properties, overlooked corridors, assets that the market had mislabeled. She recognized the shape of something that had been deliberately removed from view. She did not ask Isaac to keep looking that night. The next morning was clear and cool, the sky washed to a pale blue by the storm, the gutters still running. Charlotte walked the main street of Millbrook because the Porsche was at the only repair garage in town, and she had nowhere else to be. She turned onto Birchwood Lane without fully deciding to. The F-250 was in the driveway. Logan was on the roof of Edna Marsh's house with a pry bar, pulling up 3 shingles the storm had folded back. A small girl sat under the oak tree in the yard with a spiral notebook and a set of colored pencils, drawing something with absolute concentration. The girl looked up when Charlotte's shadow moved across the grass. She said, without preamble, the way children locate the center of a thing immediately, "Are you the lady my dad pulled out of the water yesterday?" Charlotte stopped. She said yes, that was her. The girl nodded, satisfied, and said that Biscuit thought her dad was brave, but that her dad said it was just something that needed doing. Then she said her name was Nora and asked if Charlotte wanted to see her drawing. It was a picture of the truck large, deliberately colored in brown and orange, with a chain coming off the back and a white car at the end of it. In the white car, a figure with long hair stood on the roof with both arms raised. Charlotte looked up at the roof. Logan was looking at her. Not with hostility, not with the warmth of recognition, just with the flat steadiness of a man who is not surprised by much. He turned back to the shingle in his hand and continued working. Charlotte stood there in Edna Marsh's yard for a moment, longer than she had intended, holding Nora's drawing, uncertain for the first time, in a long time of what she was actually waiting for. The answers came from Franklin, the way most things in Millbrook did. Charlotte stopped into the market the following afternoon for coffee and found the old man behind the counter in no particular hurry. He watched her look out the window toward the street, and he said, not unkindly, that she was curious about Logan. She said she was. Franklin poured a second cup without being asked, pushed it across the counter, and told her what he knew, not because he was gossiping, but because he was the kind of man who believed that some truths deserve to travel farther than they have. Logan Hurst had spent 9 years at Meridian Power Systems as a senior systems engineer, not a manager. An engineer in the specific, foundational sense, the person who designed the architecture of things, who made the decisions that nobody upstream saw until something went wrong. He had been one of the best in the southeastern grid sector, which was a small enough world that the people at the top knew each other. He had been, by Franklin's account, and Franklin had gotten this from Logan's late father-in-law, who had told the story exactly once, quietly, at a dinner table, a man the company had been planning to make a regional director before everything changed. His wife's name had been Sarah. She had been 31 years old and 14 months into motherhood when she drove into a flooded underpass on a secondary road in a county 3 hours from Millbrook on a night when the warning signal at the intersection was not functioning. Logan had known the signal type. He had worked on the maintenance specifications for that infrastructure class 2 years earlier and had flagged in an internal document that the battery backup threshold for flood event override was insufficient for multi-day precipitation events. The document had been reviewed, assigned a priority code, and left. Sarah's car went into the underpass at 11:47 at night in a Category 2 rainfall event. She did not come out. Nora had been asleep in her car seat. A passing driver had gotten her out before the car went fully under. Logan had been at home, awake, because Sarah had said she would be back by 10. He filed a technical analysis the following month, not a lawsuit, not a press release, a 30-page engineering document that traced the signal failure through the maintenance record, the original specification deviation, and the specific meeting in which the fix had been deprioritized. He submitted it through legal channels, naming Meridian's infrastructure division as the responsible party. Meridian had lawyers who were very good at their jobs. They offered a settlement with a non-disclosure clause. Logan refused. They offered a larger settlement with the same clause. He refused again. 2 months later, his project assignments were quietly reduced. 6 months later, his role was eliminated in a restructuring. He filed for arbitration, won a modest finding, and walked out of the building on a Wednesday afternoon, carrying a box that held 9 years of work and a laminated badge he snapped in 2 pieces in the parking lot. He moved to Millbrook because Sarah's parents had lived there, because Nora would grow up near her mother's people, and because the town was small enough that a man could start over without anyone expecting more of him than what he chose to give. Franklin finished his coffee. Charlotte had not touched hers since he started talking. He said, "He doesn't talk about any of this. The only reason I know is because Robert Sarah's father told me one night before he passed, and I've never said it to anyone in this town, and I'm telling you because you're about to make a decision about this place, and I think you should know what kind of people live here before you decide what it's worth." Charlotte looked at the coffee cup. She thought about the badge in the truck's center console that she had noticed, briefly. When Logan was loading gear before the rescue, she hadn't understood it then. She thought about the tow strap and the steadiness in the current and the $12,000 Porsche pulled free by a man the world had already tried twice to make feel small, who had declined both times. She stood up, left a 20 on the counter for the coffee, and walked out into the afternoon light. The main street of Millbrook looked different to her than it had 2 days ago, though nothing on it had changed. The town hall meeting was Thursday evening, held in the Millbrook Community Center, a building that smelled of wood floor polish and old coffee and had been the site of every consequential local conversation for 40 years. Charlotte and Isaac arrived at 6:50, with a presentation on Isaac's laptop and a projector they had borrowed from the inn. The room held about 40 people, council members, business owners, a few farmers, several residents who had come out of the particular small-town awareness that when someone from the city comes to explain an opportunity, the community had better be there to ask questions. Charlotte set up, adjusted the projector, and presented. She was good at this. She had given versions of this presentation many times, and she knew how to move between the emotional case jobs, growth, revitalized infrastructure, and the empirical case land values, traffic projections, comparable developments in analogous markets. The council members listened with the attentiveness of people who had seen developers come through before and knew the difference between a presentation and a promise. Logan was in the back row. She had not seen him come in. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and he had a small notebook on his knee with nothing written in it. Charlotte noticed him during the third slide and held her next sentence half a beat longer than intended before continuing. The questions from the floor were predictable. Displacement concerns, parking, the timeline for construction noise. Charlotte answered them precisely and honestly, which she had found was always the most efficient approach. Then Logan raised his hand. She recognized the gesture and nodded to him. He stood up, unhurried, and spoke in a voice pitched for the back of the room. Your development plan assumes the existing electrical infrastructure in this district can support a commercial load of that scale. It can't. The Millbrook North substation has been operating above its design capacity for seasonal peaks since 2019. The transformer bank has not been upgraded. If you build to the footprint in your current drawings and bring that facility to full commercial occupancy, you will trigger rolling outages in a 2-kilometer radius every summer during peak demand. That means this building, the medical clinic on Pratt Street, and approximately 240 residential units. The room was very quiet. Isaac looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at Logan. She said, "Do you have documentation?" Logan reached into the notebook and removed a folded sheaf of papers not printed on a company letterhead, not bound, not formatted for an audience, just the numbers set down on pages by someone who did not need the presentation to know the work was right. He set it on the table at the end of the row. Charlotte picked it up. It took her 3 minutes to read through the key sections. The data was correct. It was not approximate or directional. It was precisely correct, and it covered an infrastructure gap that her engineering consultants, a firm she paid $200,000 a year, had not identified in 6 months of due diligence. The meeting adjourned without a decision. People filtered out in small groups, talking quietly. Charlotte stood at the table with the projector still running and the papers in her hand. Logan helped Nora into her jacket near the door, zipped it to the top, said something to her that made her smile, and walked out into the night without looking back. Charlotte watched the door close behind him and understood, with the clarity that sometimes arrives only after enough friction, that the man had not brought those numbers to the meeting to embarrass her or to block her project. He had brought them because he had seen the drawings, recognized the gap, calculated the consequence, and arrived at the only logical response to information that could harm people, which was to make the information known. He had not sent an anonymous tip. He had not called the county. He had stood up in a public room with his name attached to what he knew and said it plainly. She had once done something similar, in a different way, in a different room. She knew what it cost. The night before she left Millbrook, Charlotte sat at the small desk in her room at the inn and revised the development plan from first principles. Not the presentation, the plan itself. She called Isaac at 9:30 and told him she needed the engineering file. He said, "We're scrapping it?" She said no, they were fixing it. She stayed up until 2 in the morning. The version she had when she finally closed the laptop was different in 3 significant ways from the version she had brought into that community center. It included a full replacement and upgrade of the Millbrook North substation as a precondition of the development timeline. It restructured the phasing so that the existing small businesses on the main street would operate under guaranteed lease protections for a minimum of 10 years, and it removed two of the larger commercial footprints from the northern section to reduce the infrastructure demand to a level the upgraded grid could support. It was a less profitable plan by roughly 12% over the first 7 years. It was also a plan that would actually work. She was up at 6:30. She had Logan's address from Isaac's file. She drove the Porsche, which the garage had gotten running again, replacing the air intake and drying the electronics out to Birchwood Lane, and parked at the curb. The lights were on. She knocked. Logan opened the door in the particular way of a person who has lived alone with a child long enough that any knock before 7 carries a weight of possible emergency alert but not alarmed. He looked at her. He was holding a coffee mug. Nora was not visible, which meant she was still asleep. Charlotte said, "I saw you at the parking lot. I laughed at your truck, and you saw me, and I want to say that directly rather than pretend it didn't happen." Logan held the mug and did not speak. She continued, "It wasn't a decision. It was a reflex. That doesn't make it better. I'm not telling you because I think it changes anything I'm telling you, because you deserve to hear it said plainly, without me hiding behind the fact that you've since done something that makes it awkward for me to acknowledge it." Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he turned back to the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and took down another mug. He set it on the counter next to his and filled it from the pot. He set it on the table. He sat down. He did not say "you're forgiven," because it was not that kind of moment, and he was not that kind of man. He did not say "it's fine," because it was not a thing that needed to be declared fine. He simply made the next available gesture, which was coffee at a kitchen table on a gray morning, and waited to see if she would sit down. Charlotte sat down. They drank coffee. She told him about the revisions. He listened without commenting until she had finished, then asked 2 questions, both technical, both about the substation upgrade specifications, and she answered them as best she could, which was not as well as he could have. He said, "You'll want someone who knows the local grid to review the infrastructure section before you resubmit. The county specs are different from state standard on the secondary distribution side." She asked if he knew someone. He looked at his mug. She understood before he answered. Then Nora appeared in the hallway in pajamas with a bear under one arm, saw Charlotte at the table, and said without any particular surprise that if Charlotte was staying for breakfast, her dad made good eggs. Logan looked at Charlotte with an expression that contained no pressure in either direction, neither the hope that she would stay nor the preference that she leave. Charlotte looked at the window, where the morning was coming in clear and cold over the yard, and thought about the 11 missed messages on her phone, and the restructured project file on her laptop, and the flight she had not yet rebooked. She said she would stay for eggs. Logan stood up and went to the refrigerator. Nora climbed into the chair across from Charlotte, settled Biscuit on the table, and began to explain, in the unprompted and detailed manner of 7-year-olds, exactly what Biscuit thought about scrambled versus fried. Charlotte listened. For the first time since she had driven into Millbrook, she did not look at her watch. 3 weeks later, the revised proposal arrived at the Millbrook Town Council with a cover letter on Vane and Associates letterhead. The new plan included a line item for Millbrook North substation replacement totaling $1.4 million, a 10-year commercial lease protection clause for all existing Main Street tenants, and a revised phasing schedule that shifted groundbreaking to the second quarter of the following year to allow for infrastructure completion. In the appendix, under the heading Technical Review and Infrastructure Consultation, there was one entry: Hearst Electric Industrial Electrical Infrastructure Advisory. Franklin received a preliminary letter of intent for a supply partnership with the planned development's food hall anchor, covering procurement of locally sourced goods. He called Logan that evening and said, "That woman's not as bad as I thought." Logan was in the backyard watching Nora run circles around the tire swing. He said, "She's probably better than either of us thought." Franklin laughed and said Logan only said that because he'd had her coffee. Logan said nothing, which was its own answer. The call from Isaac came on a Thursday afternoon. Logan was under a kitchen sink in a house on Oak Street, replacing a junction box that someone had wired badly and never corrected. He listened to the offer while lying on his back looking at the subfloor. The retainer was fair. The work was real, not ceremonial, not a gesture toward the community. but actual infrastructure review and specification writing for a commercial project that needed someone who understood both the technical side and the local grid's particular history. The terms Isaac read were standard. Then Isaac said, "There's one contingency the client wanted to flag. The work would require periodic travel to Nashville for project meetings." Logan set down his pliers. He looked at the junction box above him for a moment, then at the rectangle of afternoon light coming through the window over the sink. He called back 6 minutes later, when he was standing in the driveway, which was where he went when he needed to hear himself think. He told Isaac he would take the contract. He said there was one condition, and that the condition was not negotiable. All site work would be performed locally, and all Nashville meetings would be scheduled with a minimum of 1 week's notice and could not be stacked consecutive, because he had a daughter and a custody schedule that was not a custody schedule so much as a life. Isaac said he would confirm with the client. Logan said to confirm or decline, not to discuss. The call ended. Isaac walked into Charlotte's office in Nashville and told her Hearst had agreed with one condition. He read it. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Accept it. No revisions." Isaac wrote it down. Charlotte turned back to the screen. The project map of Millbrook was open on her left monitor. She had been looking at the substation placement when Isaac came in. The stretch of County Road 12 was marked on the map in red, the way emergency flagged infrastructure always was. She looked at it for a second, then reduced the view and opened the next file. In Millbrook, the F-250 was in the driveway of the Birchwood Lane rancher every morning when the sun came up, backed in the way a man parks when he might need to leave fast, its paint worn down to the primer, in patches along the tailgate, its passenger side mirror wrapped in electrical tape that had been there since February. It had started every morning without complaint for 31 years. It would start the next morning, too. Somewhere, some months back, a woman in a white Porsche had laughed at it in a parking lot. That woman now knew exactly what it was capable of, and so did the 240 households in its grid radius, and so did the town council of Millbrook, and so did a 7-year-old girl who had drawn a portrait of it in orange and brown crayon that was currently taped to the refrigerator door in a house that smelled like coffee and lemon cookies and wood floor wax, where the doors all closed flush, and where things that ran were not replaced just because they looked like they should be.